Welcome to the Health Trip Podcast. My name is Jill Foose. I'm a functional medicine and integrative nutrition health coach. I created this podcast to bring you along as we travel down intriguing, science-packed roads, debunking old medical paradigms and perusing new innovative therapies and modalities with the finest functional medicine doctors, practitioners, and like-minded biohackers while living our best life. Enjoy the show. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode on the Health Trip Podcast. For many women, midlife brings hormonal changes that can affect not only their physical health, but also their sexual well-being and intimacy. Whether you're experiencing a loss of libido, painful sex, or simply navigating new emotions around your body, you are not alone. Today, my guest and I are breaking down the myths, offering practical advice, and bringing in insights on how menopause impacts sexual health and how you can maintain or rediscover intimacy, pleasure, and eroticism during midlife. In this episode, we'll talk about common challenges like vaginal dryness, loss of desire, and the emotional aspects of sex in midlife, while also exploring ways to foster a pleasurable, fulfilling sex life post-menopause. We're here to remind you that sexual pleasure and connection don't have to diminish with age, and with the right strategies and tools, you can redefine intimacy on your terms. My guest today is Dr. Maria Sophocles. She's a gynecologist whose mission is to address gender inequality in the bedroom, what she terms the bedroom gap, by educating men and women about the sexual changes of menopause and by fostering open conversations around female sexuality. She believes sex should be about pleasure as well as procreation, and that we remain rather universally trapped in a centuries-old model of sex for male pleasure. As a gynecologist, she is well informed about how women's bodies age and how the sexual effects of menopause are neither understood nor discussed. Having talked with and treated women around the world, she knows this broken, dried up feeling midlife women develop is universal. In 2015, she pioneered the use of lasers to regenerate vaginal tissue and introduced this technology to clinicians on 5 continents. She mentors women in STEM and entrepreneurs with ideas. She's a board-certified member of the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, holds formal certification as a menopause expert from the Menopause Society, and is a fellow of the International Society for the Study of Women's Sexual Health. She has been named a fellow of the International Society of the Study of Vulvo-Vaginal Diseases for her contributions to gynecology. Check out her TED Talk, The Bedroom Gap, a frank and funny look at what happens to sex in midlife, in the show notes. Just a short medical disclaimer before we dive in. By listening to this podcast, you agree not to use this podcast as medical advice or to make any lifestyle changes to treat any medical condition in yourself or others. Consult your physician for any medical issues that you may be having. And this entire disclaimer also applies to any of my guests on my podcast. So sit back, open your mind, and enjoy the show. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Sophocles. So glad to have you here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here, Jill.
Yeah, as we're recording it, we are in the month of September, which means we are still celebrating Sexual Health Awareness Month. And, there's a lot of women in midlife right now, including myself, who really miss parts of themselves. We miss the energy that we once had. We miss the wonderful sleep we used to get, not worrying about so much weight gain. And we also miss that sexual health part of us. I certainly, as a postmenopausal 56-year-old woman, have to work really, really hard to have my arousal and my desire match at the same time, on the same day, in the same place. Like it's work.
It is. And I think, as we know, as we age, things require a little more work to stay focused, a little more work to keep fat off our tummies, a little more work to get a good night's sleep. But I would say maybe if we swap out the word work for thoughtful preparation or thoughtfulness, it seems a little less onerous. And I think women our age are okay with that. They're willing to do it. They're frustrated. They get really frustrated. They come in every day to my office and say, I'm eating nothing and I can't lose weight. And you and I know that That's because it's not that simple, and that's not necessarily the best way for them to lose weight. And I would say sort of same thing for their sexual issues. It's kind of about working smarter, not harder. And we'll get into it. We'll talk
Yeah, for
about what they
sure.
can do.
Yeah. I thought a good place to start the podcast today would be on a little anatomy 101 of the vulva and the vagina. I think there's quite a few women out there who don't really understand what all the parts do and what they are. And, I think there's a lot of women out there who think the vagina is like everything on the inside and the
Yeah.
outside. And so let's just clear the air and go over a little anatomy class right now.
Absolutely. Sorry I don't have a little whiteboard, but everyone will have to use their imagination. Um, the vagina is really only a potential space, a tube of tissue, as one doctor told me many, many years ago. That's very well vascularized, very elastic with wonderful collagen. But the collagen and the blood vessels do change with age, and we'll talk about that. But the vagina is really an internal organ. It's nothing you can see truly from the outside. The vulva is what we call the the outside part of the body, that if you put your hand between your legs and press, you're pressing on the vulva. And the vulva is really several parts within it. The mons pubis is sort of the fatty, pressy part above the pubic bone, and then that sort of becomes the labia majora, the sort of, when we're younger, I'd say chubby, thicker, puffy outer lips is what many people call it. If you gently separate those labia majora, you can find thin, thin sort of inner lips, and those are the labia minora. They're really different. The vulva and the labia majora are hair bearing. They have sweat glands. They have oil glands. They're much more like the skin on the rest of our body. Whereas the labia minora are embryologically different, and they are very much involved in sexual response. And they have erectile tissue within them. They respond very much to estrogen and testosterone. They swell and change during sexual arousal. So the big lips and the little lips, the labia majora and labia minora, yes, their names are similar, but they're actually quite different in terms of the type of tissue that they come from and their functions. A really important part of all this anatomy is something called the vestibule, that one of my professors at Johns Hopkins named about 50 something years ago. He was a devout Catholic, and so he named it the vestibule because the entrance to the church is a vestibule. I always thought that was a little bizarre, but of course, I was a good student, so I just nodded and said, okay. But the vestibule is a critical thing for us all to understand, because it's where a penis or a vibrator or a tampon first enters into the vagina. And it's really where a lot of sexual discomfort begins. I tell people it's like the first impression of someone you meet at a cocktail party. The very first thing that you say to them or they say to you really establishes how you think of them going forward. And same thing with the vestibule. If the vestibule is healthy, elastic, and comfortable, sex is much more likely to be a pleasant experience. If you have pain around the vestibule, you almost don't care how good the rest of it feels. It's painful, and you notice that. So the vestibule, again, the opening or entrance from the vulva into the vagina. The clitoris, which I think everybody's heard of this term, but believe it or not, a shocking 54% of American college students are still not quite sure where it is. I just read that in a study the other day,
Wow.
that many American college students still think the clitoris is inside the vagina. So let's clear this up once and for all. It is not inside the vagina. It is on the outside, or at least a little tiny part of it is on the outside. Um, think of it as, if the vagina is an opening, at the very top wall of the vagina is the opening to the bladder called the urethral orifice. This is where the urine comes out. But above that, north of that, is a small, small, highly, highly innervated bit, I'll say, of tissue covered with a protective hood, the clitoral hood. The clitoris is our homologue for a penis. Make no mistake. When we were embryos, they were really one and the same. And then it's the presence of a Y chromosome, which causes testosterone to have sensitivity to develop a penis. But the clitoris is so much more than that tiny, tiny little nub of tissue. That is literally the tip of an iceberg. And the clitoris is approximately 8 centimeters from side to side. That is, so it is every bit as large as a penis. It's just mostly inside. It also has a pair of bulbs, much like the penis has a scrotum with testicles. So the comparisons are actually crazy similar. But our organs are mostly internal, whereas a penis is external, the scrotum is external. So the clitoral hood protects the clitoris. And the clitoris, interesting little side bit about the clitoris. For years, we thought the clitoris had a certain number of nerve endings. And that was based on, wait for it, studies done on cows. So women hadn't actually been studied. When I went to medical school way back in the 90s, we had 0 lectures on the clitoris. When we had anatomy class, our anatomy professor told us, don't bother with it. There's not much to it. Those were his exact words. Try to walk over and find a male cadaver to continue your dissection. It wasn't until about 15, no, wait, 2005 or so almost 20 years ago, that there were actual real anatomically correct drawings of the clitoris in anatomy textbooks. So we've been way, way behind on this. And just in 2023, a US urologist published a paper using female clitoral tissue to find out exactly how many nerve endings were in the clitoris. And it turns out there's even more than in the penis. So it packs a mighty little punch. I guess we mentioned the urethra. The
Mm-hmm.
G spot, I think, is one more thing because it's a term that's in our
Mm-hmm.
common lingo, and many people are not even sure, does it really exist or not
Mm-hmm.
exist? The answer is yes, probably. And I say yes, probably because um, the G spot is really an area. It's not an organ. It's an area in the top wall of the vagina. So if you think of the vagina in a simplistic way as having a top, a bottom, and 2 sides, that along the top wall is an area where there's a particularly dense patch of nerve tissue. And this, with rubbing or thrusting, can be stimulated and can cause arousal. And we call that the Grafenberg spot or the G spot. Does everyone have one? Possibly. We don't know. Plenty of women do not have any sexual um, feelings or arousal from all the thrusting or penis and vagina sex in the world. So it's not like it's a super reproducible thing.
Hmm.
But I think it's
Interesting.
important to know that because when women have sex from penis and vagina sex, non-clitoral, or when women have orgasms, that is from vaginal stimulation, not the clitoris, we think it's actually still the clitoris just being stimulated through the walls of the vagina. Because, as I said, the clitoris is this large organ that actually comes and sort of wraps around the
Mm-hmm.
vagina. So when you're having arousal from penis and vagina sex, it's actually just the inner part of the clitoris getting stimulated.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think we can really, I don't think there's been a lot of research on who's having their orgasms from that versus from this little patch of nerves, the G spot, getting stimulated. That's like anatomy 101,
Yeah,
as
that was
quickly as I
great.
could do it.
Yeah, I'll tell you a really quick story. When I was a very young little girl, my mother took me to the pediatrician, and the pediatrician told her during this visit, just don't tell Jill she has 3 holes down there.
What? Oh my
Yes.
gosh.
And my mom thought, okay, well, this is the pediatrician, this is the
Yeah,
doctor. And back then, everyone listened to their doctors, and we still have a lot of that going on today. Um,
yes.
and that pretty much set the tone for how I discovered my own sexuality,
Yeah.
right?
Don't
Because my
ask, don't tell, right?
Exactly. I grew up with all boys. I was always so jealous of all my friends who had older sisters because I thought, oh, they're going to learn. They're going to find out what's going on down there. They're going to know exactly what to do. I'm going to have no clue. I have no one to ask because my mom was already told, don't talk about things, right? So very, very interesting.
A lot of moms
Yeah.
were told that,
Yeah.
and a lot of moms weren't taught by their moms.
Right.
And in my book that I'm writing, we talk about this, the sort of sociocultural writing of what it is to be ladylike or a woman or feminine. And part of that is this bizarre, contradictory, be sexy, be thin, beautiful, have a tiny
Mhm.
waist and big boobs, all these things that are very hard naturally to be. And at the same time, be ladylike, don't be too slutty, don't explore, don't be curious about sex, don't masturbate. There's so many don'ts for women that then
Yeah.
we expect women to go into the bedroom and be all into sex and want to be multi-orgasmic, and then we expect men to actually even know how to pleasure them when even men just aren't getting, they don't get educated, they, the sources that they learn about sex from are flawed. So there's so much room for improvement starting in the pediatrician's office, really
Yes.
starting at
No,
that level.
absolutely. I have one girl and four boys, and I made sure that I talked to all of them, but especially my daughter about sexuality. I think I bought her her first vibrator when she was in college. So,
Good for you.
yeah, it was, and I remember the next day she came back and met me and my mom for brunch, and she had a big smile on her face. I was like, all right.
Yeah, you're such a good mom. I did the
Yeah.
same, and I actually bought my daughter and all the girls on her dorm floor Emily Nagoski's book "Come as You Are"
Oh,
as sort of
nice.
a little primer of like, you know what, you guys need to
Yep.
read this so you know your anatomy, you know how to have an orgasm, you know about
Hmm.
consent, and I cannot tell you how recently some of them have even come to me and said, "Oh my God, I didn't actually pick it up till now. I'm so glad I did." You know, it's like,
Yep.
yes, because you didn't get that in sex ed. I mean,
That's
US
right.
sex ed is all fear based. It's all about don't have sex or you'll get chlamydia and die, like they said in that movie. You know, I forget which movie it was hysterical. But it's all based on, don't get pregnant and don't get
Yep.
STDs, not do have sex because you're going to anyway, and do learn about mutual pleasure and do know about your anatomy and do know how to pleasure yourself, which has just never been taught to women as a permissible, much less important, wonderful thing, I
Right.
think.
So instead everybody is on porn, looking at porn and not the good kind of porn, the porn that is so unrealistic, and that's what they're attaching to their own reality, and it's a big
That's right.
disappointment.
Well, then men also, again, I just don't want to blame men. I want to be
No, not
really clear
yeah.
that I think men are really usually trying their best. But when you see a woman moaning and screaming and having an intercourse linked orgasm, that's what you assume. And studies show that men usually do think that's how women have an orgasm. And then we don't really do ourselves any good by faking orgasms, which is also a very common practice because we're just perpetuating the myth and perpetuating the misinformation.
Yeah.
Anyway, we've got to start somewhere.
Yeah, yeah, so much to talk about, but I want to also talk about the physiological changes that women are going through um, with their vulva and their vagina during menopause before we dive into what you've coined the bedroom gap. So let's talk about some of these changes that are occurring.
So let's use the big long new name first. We used to call it vaginal atrophy, and atrophy is not a very
Hmm.
complimentary term. So a bunch of us, kind of got together to try to find a different terminology, and I think we came up with another one that's not particularly flattering to women, but it reflects the fact that the changes from the lack of estrogen aren't just in the vagina. They're the bladder, the vulva, the urethra, the clitoris, all of it. And so it's called genitourinary syndrome of menopause. Now, I don't really want to be diagnosed with a syndrome any more than you probably do, but at least it helps me understand that there's a lot of things all suffering from the lack of estrogen that accompanies menopause. GSM is really a thinning of the tissue in the vagina, a loss of collagen, a breakdown of good elastic collagen, which is then replaced with a shoddy or kind of IKEA version, we'll call it, and then a loss of blood vessels. The loss of good collagen means the vagina is not elastic, which just isn't as comfortable for sex. And even the opening can kind of constrict and become stiffer and smaller. Again, not something conducive to comfortable sex. Now, to add on top of that, the loss of blood vessels, that's tragic because the blood vessels are the source of moisture. When we get aroused, three things happen that make moisture. One relates to the blood vessels. It's sort of a seeping of fluid out of the blood vessels into the vagina. So fewer blood vessels, less moisture. Doesn't matter how turned on you are, you're not going to be able to get as wet as you would like to. The second and third thing is that there are two sets of glands at the opening of the vagina. Thank God nature put them there. And when we're aroused, those glands secrete a kind of mucousy, liquidy substance. But even those glands, when we get older, they don't secrete as well or as much. So this all kind of conspires against us, which sounds just like horrible news. But the good news, we can get to the good news later, which is that there are ways to keep all of this really healthy.
Yeah. So how does is it just the loss of estrogen, or is it a combination of the loss of estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone?
Great question, Jill. So progesterone, for all its benefit in pregnancy and in sleep and all these wonderful things progesterone does for us, it actually isn't involved in vulvovaginal health at all. It's really an estrogen and testosterone show. So depending on the embryology of the tissue, which parts came from which parts of the embryo, some tissues are sensitive to testosterone as well as estrogen, such as the clitoris, the labia minora, and the vestibule. So in my patients, I will often get them a topical testosterone cream to apply to promote the development of new nerve endings and new blood vessels. Another really important point to make is that the changes that I spoke about are chronic and progressive,
Mhm.
unlike, say, hot flashes, which you and I may have from 51 to 56, and then they go away. But this is chronic and progressive. So this is not something to wait to fix until you're just in dire straits. This is something that the sooner you take hold of and proactively fix, the better. I always tell patients, don't wait till you're a D student down there to ask me to make you an A student again. If you're a B, if you're starting to feel like you don't make the moisture you used to make, let's make the tissue better and keep it better.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about the progression of it because I have a lot of clients myself that I work with who say, I sort of breezed through menopause. I didn't really get a hot flash and I'm sleeping
Yeah.
fine. I'm not gaining weight. But there are these under the hood health issues that are going to happen, right? We know
Yeah.
that. So just the loss of tissue and vitality in our vulva and our vagina are definitely going to happen,
Yeah.
regardless of the status of your menopausal journey.
That's right. Like I focused on the vaginal changes in the vestibule, but even the vulva itself, the tissue becomes thinner, weaker. The fat pads in the labia majora, which give it a healthy, youthful, puffy look, kind of sag. And there's an explosion in cosmetic
Mm-hmm.
labiaplasty, right? Where people are either trimming excess labia minora or they're having injections into the labia majora to make them look more youthful. There's a big just explosion of requests for that. And that's a whole other topic that'd be really cool to talk about someday with you.
Yeah, for sure. All right, you coined the term the bedroom gap, and this is what your TED talk was on, which was absolutely fabulous. And it refers to the difference in sexual capabilities and expectations between men and women in midlife. And so, explain to the listeners what you're talking about when you say the bedroom gap. And by the way, we're going to get into all these solutions that the toolkit is coming. So stay with us here.
Yeah, the bedroom gap, I coined the phrase because the term orgasm gap has been out there for years, and that refers to the fact that men and women have different rates of orgasms. And in my book, I actually talk about five different orgasm gaps. And orgasm is a subset of the bedroom gap. It's a reflection of the fact that men and women have different outcomes in the bedroom. But orgasm is just one part of sexual satisfaction. And I had so many women over the last 30 years come to me feeling broken, feeling like there was something wrong, that they weren't performing like society and their partner thought they should. And they were not taught that part of menopause and part of aging is these changes. And so these everything we just spoke about has come as a big surprise to a lot of women, especially those women who said, "Well, I thought menopause was over, my hot flash has ended. So what is this fresh new hell that's developing?" Well, it's not really a new hell. It's actually been slowly, quietly developing while the estrogen was exiting. And after, I'd say, about 5 years is when women, 5 years after their last period, is when most of them come to the office saying, everything's really dry, I can't have sex, or my urinary function is different, I can't hold it, or I leak. And they feel this disconnect in the bedroom, that their husbands don't know what's going on. They feel ashamed to actually say, and they can't really say for sure. And then the icing on the cake, of course, is with the advent of Viagra and all the ED meds out there, that some of their husbands are going out and getting these medications and saying, "Guess what, honey? Instead of having sex once a week now, I want to do it 4 times a week." And we're empty nesters now, so this is going to be great. And these
Hmm.
women are going, "Oh my God, it's already painful. I barely endure it 1 time a week. How am I going to do this? I don't want to do this 4 times a week." So they push away, and then there's a disconnect, and it affects the relationship. And so the bedroom gap can really, it's a quite broad term, not just talking about sex, but about what happens in midlife to really to heterosexual relationships is what made me think of the term. But the truth is, it's something we see in homosexual relationships as well, when the partners are suffering to different degrees from the age-related effects of menopause in a lesbian relationship.
Yeah, I mean, think about how many marriages were broken up because of this bedroom gap. I know when I was going through my divorce many years ago, that wasn't our issue. We had a lot of other issues. But I remember my divorce attorneys telling me about the rates of divorce caused by this. What, of course, they didn't have the term bedroom gap, but this is exactly what they were talking about.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting to me because I did this morning ask my mom, when you were going through menopause, did your doctors talk to you about what to expect? Right? Like we have the baby and we get that book, What to Expect When
Yeah.
Expecting, right? Or before we have the baby, right? We're planning, we're preparing. We need that book. Hopefully that's your book.
We do. Well, there's a lot of great books that are coming out this year and last year. A lot of my peers are writing these books, and
Yeah.
mine will be a little different, even though it'll hit on menopause, but it's really going to focus on this and on what are the changes in our genitourinary system, and also, what does the bedroom gap say about us? What does it say about us as a society, and how can we learn from the fact that this bedroom gap is so ubiquitous that it's literally, I've been all over the world talking to medicine about to women about this, 5 different continents. And it's totally universal. This happens in every country that I've gone to and every continent. And so I think it's some of it is ingrained in our concept of male and female sex and what we call an androcentric model of sex. Another word to that I learned about is the phallocentric imperative. It's about the penis and the man getting pleasure and about procreation. And if you notice in those two things, nowhere in either of those is female pleasure. So it's about reframing and reprioritizing what our definition of sex is, and then having the strength to advocate for ourselves. And I think that starts with learning our anatomy, just like you and I started
Mm-hmm.
today.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Also, maybe in finding support groups and finding coaches, finding people who we can talk to more than once for 10 minutes, because uh, doctors are busy. Our health system is not conducive
Mm-hmm.
to
Mm-hmm.
fostering trust and openness. It's conducive to walk in, get a prescription, walk out, or get an MRI ordered. And I think this is where, Jill, what you're doing is just priceless, just so, so great. I think health coaches are going to end up being, for smart doctors, the right hand person that can really, again, put icing on the cake of medicine and make patients know what they're doing and make changes, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, like we were talking about before we went on the podcast, women can go to their doctors, get the hormones they need, self advocate, understand, walk out and have a routine, but they still have to connect the dots to how they feel about themselves, how they feel about their sexuality. How can mindfulness play a role in here? How does nutrition fit in, and optimizing your sleep and your movement, all the things. So, there's a lot of work to be done in this arena.
That's right.
There was an article that came out today. I don't know if you saw it in Psychology Today. Well, it was just released online today, and it was all about masturbation and how midlife women are experiencing all these physiological changes that we just discussed, and how masturbation could be used as a tool possibly instead of hormone replacement therapy. Like it's just as good. Now we know that
Wow, I need to
right.
see that article. I'm sorry.
We know that masturbation is good for us, right? We should all be embracing that part of our sexuality, and a lot of women are not, and there's a lot of
Yeah.
shame, as you know, around that. So I thought it was a really interesting article. I'll have to send you the link to it.
I can't wait to read that. And I'm a big proponent of what I call self love, or my friend
Hmm.
Kelly Casperson calls self cultivation, because I think to know yourself, just like Aristotle said, know thyself. Well, if Aristotle had been a sex therapist, he would have also said, know thyself sexually or anatomically. When we know ourselves, we can better ask for what we want because we know how to pleasure ourselves and we have more confidence to say that to a partner or a lover. I have patients who've been married for 30 years and they've talked with their husband about everything from taxes to families to gardening to raising children, but they have never talked about sex with each other. They climb in bed
Hmm.
and every Friday night they do it at 10 o'clock in the missionary position, and that's it. And it's like never the twain, there is no need for any other discussion. Except there is, because there's usually one person in that couple that's not actually getting pleased. And so I hope articles like that can go mainstream and women can read them and then hopefully find people like you and I, because I'm a gynecologist and a sex therapist. So
Hmm.
that's been a
Hmm.
really
Hmm.
fun combo to talk to people like yourself, people like me, and say, could there be something more for me? I
Yeah,
don't know that I would say swap them out for hormone therapy, only because I'm a huge believer in the long-term health benefits to the brain, the
absolutely.
heart, and the bone. And boy, I'd love to see an article showing me that masturbation would reduce coronary artery plaque formation. That'd be amazing. But until I see that, I'm still going to be really hopeful that women will seize on the dramatic benefits to hormone replacement therapy for the heart, because heart disease is the number one killer of women, for the brain, because we're having a demographic explosion of dementia and Alzheimer's, and for the bone, because that's just a no-brainer. Why people our age wouldn't want to have stronger bones at 70, 80, and 90. There's like,
Yeah.
it's about risk. It's about taking whatever you perceive as risk and being able to weigh that against benefit.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. Yeah, this is a good place to segue into what are the options for women to support their sexual health and wellness. And I just went to my orthopedic surgeon to have my hip looked at, and I'm getting an MRI. I've been having some pain there. And on the questionnaire, one of the two or three of the questions were all about my sexual health, my sex life, right?
wow,
Yeah, I was so impressed, right?
me too.
Does this pain impede your ability to have sex in certain positions and all the things,
Mhm.
right? And I just thought that was
Wow.
great. And when I walked in, and of course, it's the assistant doctor in the beginning, and I said, how much do you know about hormone replacement therapy and this arthralgia, this pain that I'm having? He said, I'm actually really starting to understand it. And it's fascinating. It's not something we're taught about in med school. So with that, let's dive into women's options. Maybe let's start with medications. We'll talk about
Sure.
hormones.
The I think what we want to talk about is options for lifelong sexual health, right?
Yes.
And there's a couple ways to approach this. One is what products are out there that can make us have more comfortable or pleasurable sex. And I think we should do that, but we should do that second. I think first we should say, what can we do to make the tissue as healthy as possible so that either you need fewer of those or those are just lovely
Mm,
adjuncts. So
yes.
again, to keep the tissue as healthy as possible, to make new blood vessels and new collagen, there's really four options. Option one is vaginal estrogen. It's been around since 1946. It comes as creams, tablets, suppositories, rings, something like five different companies make different things. It is four out of the five products are bioidentical estrogen. What does bioidentical mean? It means the chemical structure of that ingredient is identical to what's in our body. It doesn't mean it's made by a compounded pharmacy. So almost all bioidentical formulations that we use in our practice today are made by big pharma companies. Doesn't mean we don't use compounded pharmacy stuff. We do, because there is no testosterone for women. But for
Right.
estrogen, you're fine with regular old big pharma estrogen. There's also DHEA, which is marketed as Prasterone. So the brand name for that, I don't know if we're allowed to use on here, is
You can.
Intrarosa.
Hmm.
And that's a nightly suppository. It works beautifully, but it can be expensive. It's not always covered. And a suppository every night can be a little burdensome. But it does work. Okay. So DHEA is another sex steroid like estrogen. Then there's the use of testosterone. Again, there is no FDA approved formulation yet. I believe there will be, but right now we have compounding pharmacies mix it up into 1 or 2% creams that can be applied to certain areas that I spoke about earlier. The other option, there is an oral option. People forget about this, but there's an oral medication that is not a hormone. It is a SERM, a lot like tamoxifen. That means it turns on estrogen receptors in some tissues and not others. In this case, this medication turns them on in the bladder and vagina, but off everywhere else except the bone. It also turns them on in the bone. So for people with osteoporosis or even
Mm,
osteopenia, you are getting free extra support of um, of prevention of osteoporosis, which is kind of nice. It's a pill you take once a day, any time of day with food. So my patients just keep the bottle in their kitchen. Very easy to tolerate, very low side effect profile. That is called ospemifene,
hmm.
Ospemifene. The fourth option, so there's estrogen, there's DHEA, there's ospemifene, and then the fourth option is actually using laser or radio frequency energy to make little microscopic injuries in the vagina from which you recover and heal and make your own new collagen and new new blood vessels. This was invented in 2008 in Italy by two doctors, a not a gynecologist, a urologist and a dermatologist got together, and they figured out, and I know only because I know them, they figured out that, gee, laser is used all over the body. It's used in the face, and we make little micro injuries, and then our facial cells make, beautiful new collagen. So they tweaked the same machine for the vagina and the vulva. And I just happened to be living in Italy, so I knew about it. And so I was lucky enough to be the physician that brought that technology to the United States in 2015. So the first machines are still in my office sitting there, and we still use CO2 laser to regenerate vaginal and vulvar tissue and help women with bladder issues or vaginal dryness. It's not perfect. Estrogen's not perfect. None of them are 100% guaranteed, but all of them work quite well, and all of them are extremely safe. There are non-medication ways to sort of optimize things. So pelvic floor physical therapy, for example, in women who have sort of laxity of tissue or urinary incontinence, or pelvic pain. There are a number of reasons we send people to pelvic floor physical therapy.
Yep.
Vaginismus, a sort of psychogenic tightening of the
Hmm.
pelvic floor muscles that makes sex painful. There are so many reasons to get pelvic floor physical therapy. It's wonderful. Can it be time consuming or expensive? Yes, and yes. But for women who need it and benefit from it, it can really help get you to a place where you could even begin to have sex if you couldn't before. Um, Sex therapy is something that many patients, when I say, they cringe and go, no, 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 I don't need that. I mean, I think there's, I don't know if it's again the shame thing or they think of it as some big undertaking, but I will say that if you're thinking you might want to talk to someone who really focuses on sexual issues, you can go to the website AASECT.com. That's the American Association of Sex Educators and Certified Therapists. And these are going to be therapists who've really done extra work just on talking comfortably with people about sex. They can speak just with you or with you and your partner. Don't poo poo it. It's really, don't be afraid of it, rather. It can be a really kind of opening and unlocking of things that maybe you're bringing into the bedroom that you don't realize that are
Right.
impacting the bedroom gap. For instance, how you learned about sex as a child, or a trauma from, I don't know, walking in on your parents, or an uncle inappropriately touching you that you buried for 30 years. I mean, there's a lot more,
Yeah.
quote, trauma than most of us ever share or know. And again, in a 15-minute doctor visit, doctors don't often give the vibe that they want to hear that. And so patients stay quiet. And when I say doctors, I mean this means really all clinicians, nurse practitioners, PAs, who I love and who have just brought such empathy and expertise to the world of women's health. But even they can be time pressed and not be comfortable talking about stuff.
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
sex toys
Mhm.
and lube has got a whole nother topic, Joe. We could do an hour on, but I think just in general to give a blessing to that and to say we are living in a time of explosion of tech startups and including um, sex positive startups and companies designing toys for women, women designing sex toys for women. Thank you. We do not need more sex toys that look like penises. Not that they don't work and help, but we really, um, I think having women in the design space has been fantastic.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I'm a huge proponent of using vibrators and introducing a lot of my clients to them because it's just a tool in the toolkit. And we both know Dr. Lauren Stryker. She's a
Yes,
Chicago OBGYN. And on one of her podcasts, she said, vibrators are not sex toys, they
toys.
are sex tools, right? They are a tool to use because, as you were speaking to, the tissue in the vulva become desensitized. They become less sensitive because of all of these physiological changes that are happening in there. Um, and I can tell you from my own personal experience that having a vibrator present during intercourse with my partner is how I'm gonna get to the end.
Yeah.
It'll be really difficult for me to get to the end and have an orgasm without that, because I have noticed over the years that I am less sensitive on my labia, on my clit, everywhere.
Yeah. Now there are topical creams that you can apply, 10 to 30 minutes before you have sex that will cause increased blood flow and sort of heighten the experience. But I have to say they're very hit or miss and it's
Yeah,
very
they don't work for
idiosyncratic.
me. Yeah.
And I know, and I don't want to totally crap on them because I have some patients for whom
Yes.
they really help. The point is that we, you and I, and everyone our age should be open minded to trying
Yes.
different things. What works for you? What works for you
Mhm.
may not work for me, and vice
Yes.
versa.
Yep.
And it's wonderful if people can find a health coach or a clinician or both who can just, I tell patients, I feel like a waitress. I'm going to show you what's on the menu. I'm not really
Mhm.
sure if you love seafood or meat or veg, but I'll show you different options and you tell me where you want to start. And mindfulness is another thing. It sounds so
Huge.
silly and oh God, crunchy, whatever, but it's huge. And
Huge.
don't be afraid of the word mindfulness. You don't need a Himalayan salt bowl, and you don't need to, you just need to be able to take your mind and clear it from the to-do list and the social media and the kids or the aging parent or the bills or whatever. It's not easy, but
Oh,
a
no,
little
it is not.
practice
Yeah.
is is priceless, don't you
Yeah.
think?
Oh, it is so difficult for a lot of people, including myself, that I have just devoted 3 podcast episodes with 3 mindfulness experts, that I haven't dropped yet because I am so curious about it myself, and I know that so many of my listeners are curious about it because mindfulness in the bedroom really can make a lot of difference, right? How
Totally.
how do you clear your mind so you can be in the moment, feel your body from head to toe, all the different sensations going on, the different textures, the smells, like all of it, right? And that is what helps women reconnect with their own sexuality. And for some women,
Mhm.
they've never even thought about it that way. I mean, how many women do you and I both know? And I have been that woman, and still sometimes am that woman who's laying in bed and my partner, I'm hoping he'll pass out and go to bed before me so I don't have to, do anything, right? I don't have to be mindful or think about it, right? Because maybe my arousal, my desire are not connecting in that moment.
Right. We call it sexual
Mhm.
non-concordance, right? And
Yes.
there's non-concordance between partners. You're really up for it and he's not, or vice versa. And then
Yes.
there's even between yourself with arousal and desire, where you could be desiring sex, but you're not aroused, or vice versa. So it's very hard to get everything to align at once. And a lot of my patients struggle with their husband really only likes to have sex at night and they are exhausted and they only really like to in the morning. And sometimes I have to literally assign them kind of homework and say, you know what, I want you to really almost schedule it, which sounds so unspontaneous and fun, but I want you to schedule it for Friday night and meet him there. But then another time I want you to initiate on a Saturday morning so that he knows like you are really into it then. And so we have to, it's all about communication and thinking about what isn't working. Is it that my head's too full of other stuff? And how can I clear that? And sometimes it's
Mm.
literally as simple as some breathing, some just breathing exercises. I know some women that like to shower before they go to bed if they think they're going to have sex. And I tell them that's fine. You don't have to, but if you want to, use the shower as your decompression time. Let the water
Mhm.
run down you and try to envision literally the things sticking in your brain, the to-do list, the job application, the college application your kid didn't get finished, as little bits of detritus on a river flowing, and they're flowing towards you and it's so frustrating, and then let them flow by and let them keep going, and then feel the shower running down, and that's sort of helping them to kind of cleanse their mind. And then they get out of the shower, and when they get out of the shower they are more in the moment than they were before they got in that shower. It's sort of a,
Yeah.
well, I love water, so for me water is a way to sort of clear my head, so I try
Right.
to help patients do that too.
Yeah.
um
I
and
two
then there's,
questions. Wait, two
yeah.
questions come to mind real quick. One is for the beginner listening about using a vibrator. What are some
Yeah.
strategies that you would recommend? And then my other question, before I forget and have that menopause moment, is
Mhm.
um, what are other ways to help support our desire, right? The arousal is in our vulva, in our vulva, right? The touch and the sensations, right? But our desire is really in our brain. And those
Right.
two are so disconnected in during this menopausal phase for so many women.
Yeah. So let's start with the first question. I
Yeah.
had to quickly write them down because I have a
Totally.
menopause brain. So the
Uh-huh.
first question, I'm going to repeat it for the listeners, was someone who really hasn't masturbated much or ever. How do you start? That is a great question because it's almost like dieting. It's the scary, and not that I'm advocating dieting, I'm not. But I'm saying, or going on a weight loss regimen, or saying, I'm going to start running, I'm going to be a runner. The hardest thing is to think about how do I begin? And it can be intimidating. So I would say the first thing is find a couple sites that sell them so you can look at them. Like in my office, every exam room has a beautiful glass case with all different toys so that people can kick the tires, touch them, and it destigmatizes it for women.
Yeah.
There are a lot of vibrators out there that are not shaped like a penis, and I think that's great. Look at the company Lelo, Lelo, and the
Hmm.
company Dame. These are two nice ones, I think, with high grade
Yeah.
silicone products and non-threatening designs. Start with one that's non-threatening and start with what I call G-rated masturbation, not genital, not anywhere near your genitals. Literally bring it into the shower with you and use the vibration on your inner aspect of your arms or the side of your breasts or your inner thighs or wherever it feels good to you. We're all different, but we all know what parts of our body we like touched, and we know at what pressure and everything. Play around with these toys. They come in different strengths of vibration. Once you begin to do that, you begin to just understand that pleasure does not have to be genital. Pleasure does not have to lead to an orgasm. So take the orgasm thing away and even take the genital aspect away at first. Once you've done that and you do that and you realize how nice that feels, you can make it maybe an external genital thing just on the vulva. You're just putting this egg-shaped little device down between your legs and feeling how nice the labia feel to have pressure or vibration. Um, and only when you want to, really, if ever, does it have to be something internal or something clitoral. There are devices just for the clitoris. Some have sound waves that sort of pulse the clitoris. Those are amazing. Some have sort of suction, but all that can be kind of intimidating. It's like no one wants
Yeah.
to learn to drive on a Ferrari. You want to learn on a Prius or a Toyota, a Honda Civic or something basic, right? And so I would keep it G-rated at first. That's my advice. And then work your way up
Yeah.
to genital.
Yeah.
Um,
I'd
you're
also
s-
wait, I'd
Go
also like
ahead.
to say that a lot of women fear that their male partners are going to feel
Threatened.
yes. And I would have to say that I have just anecdotally asked a lot of men, my male friends or whoever, my partner, my ex-husband, they are out, they just want to please you. They really truly want
Yeah,
you
it's
to
one of
have
their biggest turn-ons, right?
yes, yes.
hmm
So take
hmm
the fear out of and the shame out of introducing it into couple play.
Well, this is a part of a sort of between the lines definition of the bedroom gap too, is that awkward, I don't want him to know I'm not satisfied, so I'll moan or fake it. Or
Yep.
I don't want him to think he's not enough, so I don't want to tell him that I want a toy
Yep.
in our sex play. So this is where, I mean, communication, which we didn't really talk about today, but communication is just critical. And how, maybe another episode we could talk about how do you begin that communication,
Hmm.
I mean, you and I could even role play or something. But I
Yeah.
think we want to help listeners feel that they could start that. It's not taboo and no one's going to judge you and no one's going to think you're ungrateful and no one's going to feel threatened. And if they do, they need more communication and more help, or maybe that's not the right person for you. Because in general, men are super turned on by you being
Yep.
turned on. I think you
Absolutely.
couldn't have said that better.
Yep.
Um, and so I guess that leads me to the last thing I want to say about this whole topic, which is about how do we make ourselves more interested in sex? And I think that's with bringing sexual content into our brain. And we live in a cool time where we can do this in a more wholesome fashion. We
Hmm.
don't have to look at male created, male directed porn and try to
Yep.
squint and be grossed out and figure out how that makes us feel. There are porn sites for women. There are apps out there like Quinn that will read a story to you. I keep the app in my phone and I put headphones on and let someone read me a story with erotic content. And why this works is because the female brain stores this erotic content. We're very practical beings and it stores it and stores it. And so when you put your head on your partner's shoulder and you've had those stories fed into your brain about, I don't know, the sexy boss who makes love to the new intern or whatever, a teeny bit of that gets internalized and you feel that shoulder as a more masculine or erotic piece of part of the body than just the thing next to your husband's neck and or your partner's neck rather. And so I think bibliotherapy, Greek biblio means book in Greek, bibliotherapy is a cornerstone of how we help women to bring erotic content into the brain and sort of fill a savings account of that, that helps them be able to initiate or be interested in sex.
What about the medications Addyi and Vyleesi?
So Addyi and Vyleesi are the two FDA approved medications for sexual function. Addyi works much like an antidepressant on serotonin and dopamine, but we don't know exactly how it works, but we believe it works in the same ways that antidepressants work. It's very safe. It really is. The side effects are really very easily tolerated. You just have to take it last thing at night before you go to bed, but it not but it is taken every day. It's not like Viagra where you just take it on demand
Yeah.
right before. You take it every day to sort of prime your brain into being more interested in sex. And I tell patients who I put on Addyi that it will work much better if you are also um, increasing your intake of erotic content through magazines and books and films, massage, masturbation, all of that. Vyleesi works a little differently. It's on demand and it's not, I don't want to say in the minute, but it's an injection that you give maybe an hour before you want to have sex. It lasts about 15 hours. It's very powerful. It can be hard to get covered. Um, I don't have many patients who use it regularly. I have some who've tried it. I have some who will ask me for it before they go on vacation or something.
Mhm.
But I think the side effect of nausea and vomiting is a big turnoff because who wants to be vomiting before you have
Right.
sex?
Right.
But the truth is that goes down after the first time you
Mhm.
use it. So you need to be really motivated and educated to use Vyleesi. You need to have a clinician who teaches you all that and who says, now, what I tell my patients is the first time you do it and put on a video and watch a movie and then go to bed. Don't worry about sex. The second time you use it, the rate of nausea and vomiting is much lower and could be nothing for you and you could enjoy it. So I always make them do like a
Yeah.
warm up.
Yeah. So a few years ago, I tried PT-141, which is the peptide version, right? So I mean, it's still what Vyleesi is.
Yeah,
And this was a nasal spray, and
right.
some people absolutely love it. I did not like it. It was way too strong for me. Um,
Yeah, yeah,
where my yeah, it was just too strong. It did not work. But I love that there are so many options out there for women to address both their desire and their arousal. And it's not just all about hormones. It's not just all about certain medications. We have all these lifestyle components to this equation, really opening our minds up to stepping out of our comfort zone and really
yeah.
addressing things in our past, things that, and having this vision of what we want in our present and in our future. Um, so what a wonderful conversation this was today. I know there's going to be so many golden nuggets for women to walk away with. My final question is, what is coming down the pipeline for supporting women's sexual health?
For supporting women's sexual health, I think is the fact that right now testosterone is still considered a controlled substance. This is got to change because women like clinicians like myself need to be able to prescribe it and need to be able to prescribe it to women in other states. We are living in an era of virtual healthcare where it's exploding, and I myself am licensed in, 24 states. I have patients from all over the country. I have patients in other countries. And I can not prescribe testosterone to patients in those states where I'm otherwise taking care of them because I don't have a specific controlled substance license in that state. So it's terrible. I can help them and then it's like bait and switch. Oh, but I can't give you that. So we need to make testosterone, number one, standardized. We need an FDA approved formulation or 10 of them. We need it to be not a controlled substance, and we need to open up, the discussion and teach our providers more about sex. So we need better sex education in medical school and residency, and then to standardize the medications, and then to keep funding research in women's sexual health, which is just a teeny little sliver.
Yeah,
So
that's so
that's what we
interesting.
could do.
Yeah, I network with a lot of OBGYNs, obviously in the Chicagoland area through events. And so many times I meet them and they'll say that they will prescribe estrogen and progesterone, but they are very unsure about testosterone. It's not something that they have learned yet. So they're very uncomfortable prescribing it, even in the compounded form. So it's really
That's true.
interesting, but it is getting its spotlight coming soon. Like there's more and more women like yourself, doctors talking about testosterone and the immense benefits it has beyond just our sexual health.
And believe it or not, there's a petition going around that your listeners can sign, and I can even send you, a
Yep.
link to do that. And they can even reach out to their congressperson and say, "Hey, this needs to change." I mean, Congress can actually make a difference here and help get testosterone off the controlled substances list so that doctors like myself can prescribe it comfortably because it is so safe in the little even the little compounded formulations we use. But it needs to be standardized so that it'll if it's standardized, then medical education will be more comfortable talking about it and
Yeah.
teaching it, and then
Yeah.
it'll just be part of the norm of how we treat menopausal women. I really think it does benefit women in so many ways. Lots of cool stuff coming down the pipeline, actually, a lot of neat stuff. Stay tuned, be really neat.
Awesome. Well, Dr. Sophocles, thank you so much for your time and expert wisdom and facts for all of us to learn from. It was such a wonderful chat with you today.
Oh, thanks, Jill. I really enjoyed it. I love sharing this, and I think my TED Talk is a nice intro because it's really what happens to
Absolutely.
sex in midlife, and then the book next year will be a little meatier version of that TED Talk where women can really learn a lot of the things we spoke about today and practice them. And I just want better. I want women to
Yeah.
have better and have agency for
Yeah.
themselves.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And I will link the TED
Pleasure.
Talk and all of your information into the show notes for everybody.
Oh, thanks. Well, take care and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Thank you for joining me. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. Lifestyle changes can be hard and overwhelming to make. By building your support team of functional medicine doctors, therapists, and health coaches, you can reach your optimal health goals. Be sure to check out my other podcasts. Until we meet again, stay healthy.